The town doctor's warning echoed through the parlor like a death sentence, and Juliana Novak felt every pair of eyes in the room turn toward her with that familiar mixture of pity and fear. "She cannot be left alone, not for a moment," Dr. Henderson said gravely to her aunt and uncle, his spectacles sliding down his narrow nose as he packed his leather bag with deliberate slowness. Another episode like yesterday's could prove fatal. Juliana sat rigid in the high-backed chair near the window, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. The afternoon sun of Hillsborough, New Mexico territory streamed through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the worn floorboards of her aunt's boarding house. It was April 1878, and she had lived in this suffocating room for 3 months now, ever since the seizures had started coming more frequently. Ever since her world had narrowed to these 4 walls and the constant surveillance of well-meaning relatives who looked at her like she was made of glass. "How long?" her Aunt Margaret asked, wringing her hands in her apron. She was a thin woman with graying hair pulled back so severely it seemed to stretch her features into a permanent expression of worry. "Indefinitely," Dr. Henderson replied. "The condition is unpredictable. She could go weeks without an incident or have 3 in a single day. There's simply no way to know." "But we run a boarding house," Uncle Thomas protested from his position near the fireplace. He was a stocky man with a ruddy face and tired eyes. "Margaret and I can't watch her every moment. We have guests to attend to, meals to cook, rooms to clean." Juliana closed her eyes, fighting back the hot tears that threatened to spill over. This was the conversation she had dreaded, the one where she stopped being a person and became a burden too heavy to carry. She had heard the whispered discussions late at night, had seen the way her aunt's shoulders sagged under the weight of responsibility that neither of them had asked for. "Perhaps a sanatorium," Dr. Henderson suggested quietly. "There's a facility in Santa Fe that specializes in cases like hers." "No." The word came out sharper than Juliana intended, and she opened her eyes to find everyone staring at her. "I won't go to one of those places. I would rather die." "Juliana, please," her aunt began, but the girl shook her head fiercely. "You've heard the stories same as I have, Aunt Margaret. People go into those places and they never come out. They're forgotten, locked away like criminals for the crime of being ill." Her voice shook, but she forced herself to continue. "If I'm such a burden, then let me go. I'll find work somewhere, find a way to take care of myself." "You know that's impossible," Uncle Thomas said, though his tone had softened slightly. "No one will hire you once they know about your condition, and you'd be putting yourself in danger." The truth of his words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Juliana was 21 years old, had been healthy and independent until a riding accident 6 months ago had left her with a head injury that healed on the outside, but brought these terrible fits that struck without warning. One moment she would be fine, and the next she would lose all awareness, her body seizing and jerking while her mind disappeared into darkness. She always woke confused and exhausted, with no memory of what had happened. "I'll make some inquiries," Dr. Henderson said, snapping his bag shut with an air of finality. "There may be families looking for a companion, someone who could provide supervision in exchange for room and board. It would be a charity position, of course." Charity. The word tasted bitter on Juliana's tongue. She had grown up the daughter of a successful merchant in St. Louis, had attended finishing school, had played piano and spoken French and embroidered samplers. Now she was reduced to this, dependent on the kindness of strangers and the reluctant care of relatives who saw her as an obligation rather than family. After the doctor left, Juliana excused herself and retreated to her small room under the eaves. She could hear her aunt and uncle arguing in low voices below, the words indistinct but the tone unmistakable. She was tearing their lives apart simply by existing. She lay on her narrow bed and stared at the sloped ceiling, trying to remember what freedom felt like. Before the accident, she had been visiting her parents' friends in Albuquerque, had gone riding with their son through the foothills. She remembered the horse shying at a snake, remembered the sick feeling of falling, and then nothing until she woke in a strange bed with her head wrapped in bandages, and her whole future changed. The seizures had started 2 weeks later. The doctors in Albuquerque had done what they could, but there was no cure, no treatment beyond keeping her safe when the episode struck. Her parents had both died of influenza the previous winter, leaving her with a modest inheritance that was being held in trust by a bank in St. Louis. She could access it when she turned 25, but that was 4 years away, and her uncle managed her monthly allowance with the stern disapproval of a man who believed misfortune was usually deserved. 3 days passed in tense silence. Juliana barely left her room except for meals, unable to bear the way her aunt flinched every time she stood up too quickly or paused too long in thought. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, her uncle knocked on her door with unexpected gentleness. "There's someone here to see you," he said. "A man from up in the mountains. He's looking for someone to help keep house, and Dr. Henderson told him about your situation." Juliana's heart lurched. "A man? Alone?" "He runs a trading post up near the Gila wilderness. Says he needs someone to help with cooking and mending, keeping the place organized. He's willing to provide room and board, and he understands about your condition." Uncle Thomas paused, looking uncomfortable. "It's not what I would choose for you, but you're of age to make your own decisions. And honestly, Juliana, we're running out of options." She followed him down the narrow stairs, her pulse racing. In the parlor stood a man who seemed to fill the entire space simply by existing. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against his buckskin shirt and arms thick with muscle from years of hard labor. His hair was dark brown and fell past his shoulders, tied back loosely with a leather cord, and his face was weathered by sun and wind, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble. He couldn't have been much older than 30, and when he turned to look at her, his eyes were an unexpected clear gray, like storm clouds over the mountains. "Miss Novak," he said, and his voice was deep and steady, the kind of voice that didn't need to be raised to be heard. "My name is Xander Jameson. I appreciate you agreeing to meet with me." Juliana found her voice with effort. "Mr. Jameson, my uncle says you're looking for help at your trading post." "That's right. It's about a day's ride north of here, up in the high country. I do business with the ranchers and prospectors, some of the Apache when they're willing. It's isolated, but the cabin is solid and the work isn't harder than what you're probably used to." He paused and something in his expression softened. "Dr. Henderson explained your situation to me. About the seizures." Heat flooded Juliana's cheeks. "I see. And you're still interested in hiring me. Most people run the other direction once they know." "I'm not most people." Xander's gray eyes held hers steadily. "The way I figure it, everyone deserves a chance to be useful, to have purpose. Your condition doesn't change that, and honestly, up where I live, you being alone when one of those fits hits you is no different than anyone else having an accident. At least if you're with me, there's someone there to help." "But they said I can't be left alone," Juliana said, hating how small her voice sounded, "that I need constant supervision." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of Xander's mouth. "Perfect. I never planned on leaving you anyway." The simplicity of his statement struck her like a physical blow. Not pity, not obligation, just a straightforward acceptance of reality. She looked at her uncle, who was watching the exchange with a mixture of relief and concern. "The arrangement would be entirely proper," Xander continued, addressing Uncle Thomas. "Miss Novak would have her own room, and I'll make sure there are supplies and accommodations suitable for a lady. I'm not looking for anything beyond honest work and fair exchange." "It's very irregular," Aunt Margaret said from the doorway, though she didn't sound as disapproving as Juliana had expected. "A young woman living alone with a bachelor in the wilderness?" "True enough," Xander acknowledged. "But from what I understand, the alternatives aren't particularly appealing either. And I give you my word as a man of honor that Miss Novak will be treated with nothing but respect." Juliana made her decision before she could talk herself out of it. "When would we leave?" Xander looked at her with something like approval. "Tomorrow morning, if you're agreeable. I need to pick up supplies here in town, and I'd like to be back before the spring storms make the trails impassable." "Then I accept." She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Jameson." "Xander," he corrected. "We're going to be living under the same roof. Seems foolish to stand on ceremony." That night, Juliana packed her belongings in a worn traveling trunk, her hands shaking with a mixture of fear and something that felt dangerously like hope. She was trading one uncertain future for another, but at least this one came with the possibility of dignity. Xander Jameson hadn't looked at her like she was broken. He had looked at her like she was simply a person who needed a place to go, and he had somewhere that needed a person. She barely slept, and when dawn broke over Hillsborough, she was already dressed in her most practical traveling clothes, a simple brown dress with a fitted bodice and a full skirt that would be suitable for riding. Xander arrived just as the sun was clearing the eastern hills, leading 2 horses and a pack mule. One of the horses was a sturdy roan mare with gentle eyes. "She's called Rosie," Xander said, helping Juliana secure her trunk on the mule. "Steadiest horse I've ever owned. You could probably have a dozen fits on her back and she'd just keep walking." It was such an outrageous thing to say that Juliana laughed despite her nerves. "Let's hope we don't have to test that theory." Her aunt and uncle came out to see them off, and there were awkward hugs and wishes for good fortune. Whatever tensions had existed over the past months seemed to have dissolved in the relief of a solution, however unconventional. As Juliana settled into the saddle, her aunt pressed a small Bible into her hands. "Write to us," Margaret said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Let us know you're safe." "I will," Juliana promised, and then Xander was leading the way out of town, and the boarding house was falling away behind them. They rode in silence for the first hour, leaving the scattered buildings of Hillsborough behind and heading into country that grew increasingly wild and beautiful. The desert gave way to rolling hills covered in juniper and piñon pine, and in the distance, mountains rose in purple waves against a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. The morning was cool, but the sun was warm on Juliana's shoulders, and despite everything, she felt something in her chest loosen. "You're probably wondering what you've gotten yourself into," Xander said eventually, guiding his bay gelding alongside Rosie. A little," Juliana admitted. "This all happened very quickly." "It did. But sometimes quick decisions are the right ones." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "I'll be straight with you, Miss Novak. Life up in the high country isn't easy. The winters are harsh, the nearest neighbors are miles away, and there are dangers ranging from mountain lions to the occasional outlaw using the wilderness to hide. But it's also the most beautiful place on earth, and there's a freedom to it that you can't find in towns." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Juliana said. "And honestly, isolation sounds wonderful right now. I'm tired of people looking at me like I'm going to shatter." Xander glanced at her, and there was understanding in his gray eyes. "Can't say I blame you. People get uncomfortable around things they don't understand. They'd rather look away than deal with their own fear." "Is that why you live alone? Because people make you uncomfortable?" "Partly." He shifted in his saddle, his broad shoulders rolling with the easy grace of someone who had spent most of his life on horseback. "I grew up in Missouri, worked on my family's farm until I was 18. Then the war came, and I fought for the Union. When it was over, I came west because I didn't know what else to do with myself. Tried my hand at various things, prospecting, guiding, ranch work. Eventually ended up with the trading post because it let me be useful without having to be around too many people at once." "The war must have been terrible," Juliana said softly. "It was. Changed a lot of men, and not for the better. I saw things I'd rather forget. Did things I'm not proud of." His jaw tightened. "But I learned that I'm stronger than I thought, and that I can survive just about anything if I have to. Figured those were lessons worth holding on to." They rode through increasingly rough country, following trails that seemed to exist more in Xander's memory than in any physical reality. He pointed out landmarks as they went, a lightning-struck pine that marked the turnoff to a spring, a particular formation of red rocks that meant they were entering Apache territory, though he assured her the local bands were more interested in being left alone than causing trouble. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat a simple lunch of jerky and hardtack that Xander produced from his saddlebags. Juliana sat on a flat rock in the shade of a twisted juniper, watching him move around the small camp with efficient economy. Everything he did seemed purposeful, nothing wasted. He was so different from the men she had known in St. Louis, with their pressed suits and careful manners. Xander was rough and wild, a product of the frontier, but there was an integrity to him that she found strangely reassuring. "Can I ask you something?" she said as he checked the cinches on the saddles. "Go ahead." "Why did you really agree to take me on? Dr. Henderson must have explained what a risk I am. What if I have a seizure and fall off my horse? What if something happens and you can't help me?" Xander straightened and turned to face her, his expression serious. You want the truth? Please. About 5 years ago, I had a partner at the trading post, fellow named Samuel, good man, hard worker. He had a different condition than yours, something with his heart. Doctors said he could drop dead any moment, that he shouldn't exert himself. So he came out here where nobody would tell him what he could and couldn't do, and we ran the post together for 2 years. Best 2 years I ever had, if I'm being honest. Then one morning I found him passed out by the woodpile. Turned out his heart had finally given out. Xander paused, his jaw working. Point is, Samuel died doing what he chose to do, living the way he wanted to live. And I'd rather have had those 2 years of his friendship and help than have never known him at all, because someone decided he was too much of a risk. Juliana felt tears prick her eyes. I'm sorry you lost your friend. So am I. But it taught me that life's too short to make decisions based on fear. When Dr. Henderson told me about you, about how you were basically being warehoused because people didn't know what else to do with you, it made me angry. Nobody deserves to be treated like that. He held her gaze. You're not a burden, Miss Novak. You're just a person who needs a chance, and I happen to have one to give. They rode on through the afternoon, climbing higher into the mountains. The air grew cooler and smelled of pine resin and earth. Juliana found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the ride, her body remembering the skills she had learned as a girl. Rosie was indeed as steady as promised, responding to the lightest touch of the reins and picking her way carefully over the rocky trail. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Xander led them off the main trail and into a narrow canyon carved by a rushing stream. The walls rose high on either side, creating a sense of protective enclosure, and the sound of water over stones was like music. They followed the stream for another mile, and then the canyon opened into a small valley, and Juliana saw their destination. The trading post was more substantial than she had expected. The main cabin was built of squared logs with a stone chimney rising from one end, and there were several outbuildings, including a barn, a smokehouse, and what looked like a storage shed. A split rail corral held a few horses, and chickens scattered as they rode into the yard. The whole place had an air of solid competence, well maintained and organized. Home, Xander said simply, dismounting and coming around to help Juliana down. His hands were firm on her waist, and she was suddenly aware of how strong he was, how easily he lifted her from the saddle as if she weighed nothing at all. It's wonderful, she said honestly, looking around at the little valley with its circle of protective mountains. The last light was turning everything golden, and she could hear birds settling in for the night. So peaceful. That's what I like about it. Come on, I'll show you around before it gets dark. The cabin's interior was a single large room with a sleeping loft accessible by a ladder. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, and the space was furnished simply but comfortably with handmade furniture that looked sturdy and well used. Shelves lined the walls, holding supplies for the trading post, blankets, tools, ammunition, tinned goods, tobacco, and various other necessities of frontier life. The loft is yours, Xander said, gesturing upward. I'll sleep down here. There's a good tick mattress up there and plenty of blankets. I know it's not fancy, but it's private and warm. Juliana climbed the ladder and found a cozy space under the peaked roof, with a real bed and a small window that looked out over the valley. It was more than she had dared hope for. When she climbed back down, Xander was building up the fire. I'll get your trunk, he said. Why don't you rest a bit? It's been a long ride. But Juliana shook her head. I'd rather help. What needs doing? A slow smile spread across Xander's weathered face. All right then, let's get the horses settled and see about some supper. They worked together in comfortable silence, falling into an easy rhythm. Xander unsaddled the horses while Juliana hauled water from the stream, and then she helped him measure out grain while he brushed down the animals. By the time they returned to the cabin, full darkness had fallen, and the stars were blazing overhead in a display that took Juliana's breath away. She had never seen so many stars, never realized the sky could hold such light. Wait until you see them on a really clear night, Xander said, noticing her upturned face. You can practically read by starlight up here. He taught her where everything was kept in the cabin as he prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread. Juliana set the table, a rough-hewn affair that could seat 6, and found herself hungry in a way she hadn't been in months. They ate by firelight, and Xander told her about the rhythm of life at the trading post, how the various prospectors and ranchers would come through at irregular intervals to trade or buy supplies, how he sometimes went weeks without seeing another soul, how the seasons dictated everything. Spring and fall are busiest, he explained. Summer's too hot for much travel, and winter can shut us in completely sometimes. But that's when I do most of my crafting. Make the things I'll trade come spring. Snowshoes, traps, furniture, leather goods. Keeps me busy. What do you need me to do? Juliana asked. Besides cooking and mending, I mean. Whatever you're able to do and willing to learn. There's always work around a place like this. Garden needs tending once the frost is past. Chickens need care. I've got goats that provide milk and cheese. Inside there's soap to make, candles, preserves when the berries come in. And honestly, just having another set of hands for the day-to-day work of running the post will make a huge difference. Plus, I'm not much for cleaning. The place could use a woman's touch. Juliana looked around at the cabin, seeing past the rough masculinity of it to the potential underneath. I can do all of that. Or, she said, I want to earn my keep. You will, Xander assured her, but you'll also rest when you need to, and you won't push yourself to the point of bringing on one of your episodes. Part of the deal is taking care of yourself. Understood? It was strange hearing someone talk to her like an adult, not an invalid. Understood. That night, Juliana climbed the ladder to the loft and found that Xander had brought up her trunk and even laid out one of her nightgowns on the bed. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. She changed and slipped between the blankets, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness night, the wind in the pines, the distant call of an owl, the crackle of the dying fire below. And underneath it all, the solid, reassuring presence of Xander, moving quietly around the cabin before settling into his own bed. For the first time in 6 months, Juliana fell asleep without crying. She woke to gray dawn light and the smell of coffee. When she climbed down the ladder, she found Xander already up and dressed, stirring something in a pot over the fire. Morning, he said with a nod. Hope you slept all right. Better than I have in a long time, Juliana admitted, accepting the cup of coffee he poured for her. It was strong and bitter and absolutely perfect. Good. We'll take today slow, let you get your bearings. I need to do some work in the barn, and you can organize the kitchen area however makes sense to you. Consider this your domain, and arrange it as you see fit. They fell into a routine over the next few days that felt surprisingly natural. Xander would rise before dawn and tend to the animals while Juliana made breakfast. They would eat together, and then he would head out to work on whatever project needed attention while she tackled the indoor chores. She discovered that the cabin was actually quite dirty beneath its rough order, and she threw herself into cleaning with an energy that surprised her. Scrubbing floors, washing windows, beating dust from blankets, organizing the chaotic shelves into something resembling a system. Xander watched her work with something like amusement. I'm starting to think you're part whirlwind, he commented one afternoon, finding her on her hands and knees scrubbing the hearthstones. I'm starting to think you've been living like a bear, she shot back. And he laughed, a deep rumbling sound that made something warm unfurl in her chest. Fair enough. Samuel used to say the same thing. They talked while they worked, gradually learning each other's histories and habits. Juliana told him about growing up in St. Louis, about her parents and their merchant business, about the finishing school that had taught her French and embroidery, but nothing about how to survive real hardship. Xander spoke more reluctantly about his own past, but she gathered that the war had left deep scars and that he had been drifting for years before finding this place. Why a trading post? She asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold. Why not just be a hermit completely? Thought about it, Xander admitted. He was whittling a piece of wood, his large hands moving with surprising delicacy. But turns out I need some human contact, even if it's just the occasional prospector stopping by to trade for tobacco. Complete isolation makes a man strange. Am I going to make you strange? Juliana teased. Constant human contact? He glanced at her, and there was something in his gray eyes that made her breath catch. You're not making me strange. You're making the place feel like a home instead of just a shelter. The words settled between them, significant in a way that Juliana didn't quite know how to name. She looked away first, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. 2 weeks passed without incident, and Juliana began to relax, to believe that maybe the seizures were becoming less frequent. She threw herself into the work of the trading post with increasing confidence, taking over not just the cooking and cleaning, but also helping Xander in the garden, learning to milk the goats, gathering eggs from the temperamental hens. Her hands grew rough with work, her arms stronger, her face tanned despite the bonnet she wore. And every day she felt more alive. She watched Xander too, though she tried to be subtle about it. Watched the way his muscles moved under his shirt when he split wood, the concentration on his face when he worked leather, the gentleness in his hands when he treated a horse's injury. He was patient with her questions, teaching her the skills she needed to survive in this isolated place. And he never made her feel foolish for not knowing things, never lost his temper when she made mistakes. Then one afternoon, while she was kneading bread dough, the familiar warning signs hit her like a wall. The world started to go fuzzy at the edges, her hands began to tingle, and she knew with sinking certainty that she had about 30 seconds before consciousness deserted her completely. "Xander," she called, her voice coming out strange and slurred. "It's happening." He was through the door in an instant, must have been working right outside. His eyes met hers, calm and steady, and then his hands were on her arms, guiding her away from the table and the hot stove, lowering her carefully to the floor. "I've got you," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "You're safe." And then the darkness took her. She woke slowly, her head aching and her body feeling like it had been beaten. She was on the bed in the loft, covered with a blanket, and late afternoon light was slanting through the small window. When she managed to sit up, she found Xander sitting on the floor near the ladder, whittling that same piece of wood and clearly keeping watch. "How long?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "About 2 hours. The seizure itself lasted maybe 3 minutes. He set aside his whittling and climbed the ladder, sitting on the edge of the bed with careful propriety. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by horses." Juliana rubbed her temples. "I'm sorry. I should have warned you it might happen. You did warn me. That's why I hired you, remember?" His gray eyes searched her face. "Do you need anything? Water? Something to eat?" Water would be good. He brought her a cup and waited while she drank, his presence solid and calm. When she handed back the cup, she found herself fighting tears. "Hey now," Xander said softly. "What's this?" "I thought maybe they were getting better. I thought maybe I could be normal here." The tears spilled over despite her best efforts. "But I'm still broken. I'm still going to be a burden." "Stop." His voice was firm but not harsh. "You are not broken and you are not a burden. You have a condition that sometimes needs managing, same as 1,000 other things. And you gave me warning. You told me what was happening, which meant I could help. That's all that matters." "But I could have hurt myself. I could have fallen into the fire." "You didn't. And even if you had, we'd deal with it. Juliana, do you think I haven't seen people get hurt out here? Last year, a prospector broke his leg falling down a mine shaft, and I had to haul him out and set it myself. These things happen. You work around them and move forward." She looked at him through her tears, this big, solid man who seemed utterly unshaken by something that had sent her whole family into panic. "How are you so calm about this?" "Because there's no point in being otherwise. Life is hard and unpredictable, especially out here. You can either spend your time worrying about everything that might go wrong, or you can deal with problems as they come and enjoy the time in between." He reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb, the gesture so tender that it made her breath hitch. "Besides, I told you. Perfect. I never planned on leaving you anyway." Something shifted in that moment, something fundamental and irreversible. Juliana looked at Xander and saw not just her employer, not just a kind stranger who had offered her refuge, but a man she could trust with the most vulnerable parts of herself. A man who saw her clearly, illness and all, and chose to stay. "Thank you," she whispered. "Nothing to thank me for. Just telling the truth." He stood, giving her space. "Rest a bit longer. I'll warm up some stew for supper." Over the following weeks, Juliana found herself falling into something she had never expected to feel again. Happiness. The work was hard but satisfying, and every day brought small triumphs. Bread that rose perfectly, a shirt mended so neatly the tear was invisible, rows of vegetables pushing up through the dark earth of the garden. And through it all, Xander was a constant presence, teaching and helping and simply being there. They talked more as the days lengthened into summer, long conversations over meals, companionable silences while they worked side by side, easy banter that sometimes veered into gentle teasing. Juliana learned that Xander had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, and he seemed to delight in making her laugh. She learned, too, that he read voraciously, that the small shelf of books in the cabin was constantly rotating as he traded for new volumes with travelers, and that he had opinions on everything from philosophy to agriculture. "You're not what I expected," she told him one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. "When Uncle Thomas said there was a mountain man who needed help, I pictured someone more, I don't know, rough." "I am rough," Xander said mildly. "You know what I mean? Crude. Uneducated." "Ah, well, my mother was a school teacher before she married my father. She made sure all her children could read and write and think for themselves. Said it was a crime to waste a mind." He was quiet for a moment. "She died when I was 16. Fever took her in the space of 3 days. I think that's part of why I joined up when the war came. Couldn't stand being on the farm without her." Juliana reached out and touched his hand where it rested on his knee. "I'm sorry. It's hard losing a parent." His fingers turned and caught hers, warm and calloused. "It is. But it also taught me to value the time I have with people, to not waste it on things that don't matter." They sat like that for a long time, hands linked, watching the stars wheel overhead. And Juliana realized with a start that she was no longer thinking about her seizures every moment, no longer defining herself by her illness. Here in this isolated valley with this quiet, strong man, she was simply herself. As spring turned to summer, a few travelers began to arrive at the trading post. A grizzled prospector named Charlie, who wanted to trade gold dust for supplies and spend an evening telling tall tales by the fire. A young Mexican couple heading north to find work on one of the big ranches, who stayed 2 nights and paid for their food by helping Xander repair the barn roof. A Membreño Apache man who spoke excellent English and traded beautifully tanned deerskins for rifle cartridges, treating Juliana with grave courtesy when Xander introduced her. Each time someone arrived, Xander stayed close to Juliana, not hovering but present, making sure she was never alone in case a seizure struck. True to his word, he never planned on leaving her. And gradually, Juliana realized that his protection didn't feel stifling the way her aunt and uncle's supervision had. It felt like care. One afternoon in late June, she was working in the garden when she looked up to find Xander watching her from the barn doorway. There was something in his expression that made her heart skip, something intense and unguarded. When he realized she had noticed, he looked away quickly and disappeared back into the barn. But the moment lingered. That night, as they cleaned up after supper, Juliana found herself hyper-aware of every time their hands brushed, every accidental touch. The cabin felt smaller somehow, more intimate. When she looked up from scrubbing a pot and found Xander watching her again, she didn't look away. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he set down the plate he had been drying and turned to face her fully. "I'm thinking that this arrangement was supposed to be temporary, that come fall, when the trails are good again, I was supposed to take you back to Hillsboro or on to Santa Fe or wherever you wanted to go. That was the plan." Juliana's chest tightened. "And now?" "Now I'm thinking that I don't want you to leave." His gray eyes held hers. "I'm thinking that somewhere along the way, this stopped being about charity and started being about something else entirely. And I'm thinking that's probably not fair to you because you're dependent on me and you might feel obligated to stay even if you want to go." She set down the pot with hands that trembled slightly. "What if I don't want to go?" "Don't you? Don't you miss civilization, other women to talk to? A future that's more than just scraping by in the wilderness with a man who's probably half wild himself?" "No." The word came out fierce and certain. "I don't miss any of that. I miss feeling useless and pitied and afraid all the time. Here, I have purpose, I have freedom, and I have you." The last 3 words hung in the air between them, huge and terrifying and true. Xander closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, his hands coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that belied his size. "Juliana," he said, and her name in his deep voice sounded like a prayer. I don't want to take advantage. You need to be sure. I am sure. She reached up and covered his hands with her own. I've been sure for weeks now. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you said perfect, when everyone else said I was too much trouble. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, tracing the curve of her face like he was memorizing it. I've been in love with you since you climbed down from the loft that first morning with flour on your nose and declared war on the state of my kitchen. And then he was kissing her, his lips warm and firm against hers, his arms coming around her to pull her close. Juliana melted into him, into the solid strength of his body and the tenderness of his touch. The kiss deepened, and she felt like she was coming home to a place she had never known she was seeking. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Xander rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered. Stay with me, not as hired help, but as my partner, my wife, if you'll have me. Yes, Juliana said without hesitation. Yes, I'll stay. I'll marry you. I'll spend the rest of my life in this beautiful, wild place with you. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she felt the last walls around her heart crumble. She had come here broken and afraid, and this man had shown her that she was neither. He had given her back herself. They were married 6 weeks later by a circuit preacher who came through the valley on his rounds. There was no fancy wedding, no elaborate preparations, just Juliana in her best dress with wildflowers in her hair, and Xander in a clean shirt with his long hair freshly combed. Charlie the prospector served as witness, and the ceremony was held on the porch of the trading post with the mountains bearing witness. I, Xander Jameson, take you, Juliana Rose Novak, to be my lawfully wedded wife, Xander said, his voice steady and sure as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. It had belonged to his mother, he had told her, one of the few things he still carried from his old life. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part. When it was Juliana's turn, she looked into those storm-gray eyes and spoke the words that bound her life to his, feeling the rightness of it in her bones. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xander's kiss was tender and fierce and full of promise. That night, when Xander carried her up to the loft, now transformed into their shared bedroom, Juliana felt no fear, only joy and anticipation. He was gentle with her, his big hands careful as he helped her out of her dress, his kisses reverent as he explored her skin. And when they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, two souls finding completion. Later, as they lay tangled in the blankets with the night breeze cool through the window, Juliana traced the scars on Xander's chest, silent evidence of the war he rarely spoke about. Tell me about them, she said softly. Some other time, he murmured into her hair. Tonight I just want to hold my wife and marvel at my good fortune. What fortune is that? That you walked into my life, that you took a chance on a rough mountain man with more solitude than sense, that you chose to stay. Juliana propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. You know, they told me I couldn't be left alone, that I was too much of a risk, too much trouble. And I said perfect, because I never planned on leaving you anyway. Xander pulled her back down against his chest, his arms strong and secure around her. Best decision I ever made. The seasons turned, summer giving way to autumn and then to winter. The first heavy snows came in November, transforming the valley into a wonderland of white silence. Juliana stood at the window one morning, watching fat flakes drift down from a pewter sky, and realized she was perfectly content. She had a few more seizures over those months, but each time Xander was there, calm and competent, helping her through the aftermath without fuss or panic. The episodes began to lose their terror. They were simply something that happened sometimes, no more defining than a headache or a stubbed toe. Her life had become so much larger than her illness. That winter was hard in some ways, the isolation more complete than Juliana had ever experienced. There were weeks when the snow was too deep for anyone to travel, when the trading post was cut off from the rest of the world entirely. But with Xander, she never felt lonely. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other or playing cards or simply talking. He taught her to tan leather, and she taught him to make proper pastry. They made love in the warmth of their bed while blizzards raged outside, creating their own shelter against the harshness of the world. By the time spring returned, painting the valley in shades of green and gold, Juliana realized with a mixture of joy and terror that her monthly courses had stopped. She waited another month to be sure, then told Xander one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I'm going to have a baby," she said, her hand pressed protectively over her still flat stomach. Xander went completely still. Then he turned to her, his face transformed by a smile so wide and genuine it made him look 10 years younger. "A baby? Truly?" "Truly." Juliana felt tears prick her eyes. "Are you happy?" "Happy?" He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I'm terrified and thrilled and absolutely overjoyed. A baby. Our baby." Then his expression shifted to concern. "But what about your seizures? Will the baby be safe? Will you be safe?" "I don't know," Juliana admitted. "There's no doctor to ask and I don't know what to expect. But women have babies out here all the time without doctors. We'll manage." "We will," Xander agreed, though she could see the worry in his eyes. "I'll take care of you, both of you." He was true to his word. As Juliana's belly swelled with their child, Xander became even more attentive, taking over the heavier chores and making sure she rested. When she had a seizure in her 5th month, he held her afterward and assured her that the baby was fine, that they were both strong. "I've been reading," he admitted, "traded for a medical text from a doctor who passed through last month. Figured I should educate myself on childbirth since we're going to be on our own." "You never cease to amaze me," Juliana said, loving him more than she thought possible. Their son was born on a cold November morning, arriving 3 weeks early but healthy and squalling with impressive lung power. Xander delivered him with hands that shook slightly but never faltered, and when he placed the tiny wrinkled creature on Juliana's chest, she saw tears streaming down his weathered face. "A boy," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We have a son." They named him Thomas after Juliana's uncle, and Samuel for Xander's lost friend. Little Tommy was a healthy baby with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determined expression, and he changed everything. The cabin was suddenly full of new sounds, crying and cooing and laughter, and Juliana discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. The seizures did not stop with pregnancy, and caring for an infant while managing her condition was the hardest thing she had ever done. But Xander was always there, taking Tommy when she needed rest, staying awake through the night when she was recovering from an episode, never complaining about the added burden. "We're a team," he said simply when she tried to apologize for needing his help so often. "That's what marriage is. We carry each other." The years unfolded with surprising speed. Tommy grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's adventurous spirit, climbing everything in sight and keeping them both constantly vigilant. When he was 2, Juliana became pregnant again, and this time she knew what to expect. Their daughter arrived in the spring, a tiny, perfect thing with dark hair and a voice that could shatter glass when she was displeased. They named her Rose, after Juliana's middle name, and the steadfast mare who had carried her into this new life. Rose was different from Tommy, more contemplative, content to sit and watch the world rather than conquer it immediately. She had Xander wrapped around her little finger from the moment she first smiled at him. By the time Tommy was 5 and Rose was 3, the trading post had become a true home, filled with the chaos and joy of family life. Juliana's seizures had become less frequent, whether from time or from the stability of her life she couldn't say, but they no longer frightened her when they came. She knew Xander would keep her safe, would keep the children safe, would hold them all together. One evening, after the children were finally asleep in the smaller room Xander had built onto the cabin, Juliana and her husband sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. It was their favorite time, these quiet moments stolen between the demands of the day. "Do you ever regret it?" Juliana asked, her head resting on Xander's broad shoulder. "Taking me on, the way your life changed?" "Every single day," Xander said seriously, and when she jerked up to look at him in shock, he was grinning. "I regret that I didn't find you sooner, that we didn't have more years together, that I spent so much time alone when I could have been with you." She smacked his arm lightly. "That's not funny. You scared me." "Sorry." He pulled her back against him, his arms secure around her waist. "But truly, no. I don't regret a single moment. You gave me everything I didn't know I needed. A family, a purpose beyond just existing. Love. They said I couldn't be left alone, Juliana murmured, remembering that day in her aunt's parlor that felt like a lifetime ago. They said I was too much trouble. And I said, perfect. Xander's voice was warm with affection and certainty, because I never planned on leaving you anyway. Best decision I ever made was bringing you home to these mountains. Best decision I ever made was saying yes. Juliana turned in his arms to kiss him, deep and slow, and full of all the love that had grown between them over the years. I love you, Xander Jameson. I love you too, Juliana Jameson, for all my days and beyond. They sat together in the gathering darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life in the wilderness that was richer than anything they could have imagined. Inside the cabin, their children slept safe and sound. Around them, the mountains stood eternal and protective. And above, the stars blazed in infinite multitudes, bearing witness to the enduring power of love and choice, and the courage to embrace an uncertain future with faith. More years passed in their mountain valley, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. The trading post flourished as word spread about Xander's fair dealing and Juliana's hospitality. Prospectors and ranchers made the journey specifically to trade with them, and many became friends who returned season after season. Juliana kept a guest book where travelers could sign their names, and it grew thick with signatures and brief notes of thanks. Tommy grew into a strong, adventurous boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to track and hunt and read the weather. Rose was quieter, but just as determined, with a gift for growing things that turned the garden into a showpiece. When she was 8, they were surprised by the arrival of another baby, a second son they named Jack, who arrived howling and red-faced and immediately made his presence known in every corner of their lives. Through it all, Xander remained Juliana's rock. As they aged together, his hair gaining streaks of silver and her face developing laugh lines, their love only deepened. They had built something real and lasting, a partnership that went beyond romance into the realm of true companionship. They knew each other's rhythms and moods, could communicate with a glance, and still found moments of passion and tenderness in the midst of their busy lives. Juliana's seizures continued, but became increasingly manageable. She learned her own warning signs better, could often predict when an episode was coming and prepare accordingly. And when they struck without warning, there was always someone there, usually Xander, but sometimes one of the older children who knew exactly what to do. Her illness became simply part of the fabric of their lives, woven in but not dominant. One crisp autumn afternoon, when Juliana was 43 and Xander 47, they stood together on a ridge overlooking their valley. The aspens were turning gold, and the air smelled of wood smoke and falling leaves. Their children were below, Tommy now 21 and helping his father run the trading post, Rose, 18 and engaged to the son of a neighboring rancher, Jack, 14 and full of energy. "We did it," Juliana said softly, taking in the view of their homestead below, the enlarged cabin and multiple outbuildings, the thriving garden and fat livestock. "We built something that will last." "We did," Xander agreed, his arm around her shoulders. He was still strong, still broad and muscular, though his hair now fell in silver waves past his shoulders. "Though I couldn't have done it without you. You made this house a home. You gave me a life when everyone else wanted to lock me away," Juliana countered. "You saw me as a person, not a problem." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the smoke rise from their chimney and the children move about the yard. From this distance they looked so small, but Juliana knew how strong they were, how capable. She and Xander had given them that, had raised them in this wild place to be self-reliant and kind. "Do you remember what you said that first day?" Juliana asked. "When Dr. Henderson said I couldn't be left alone?" "Perfect," Xander said immediately, his voice warm with the memory. "I never planned on leaving you anyway." "And you never did. Not once in all these years." "How could I?" He turned her to face him, his gray eyes still sharp and clear despite the passage of time. "You're the other half of my soul. Leaving you would be like leaving part of myself behind." Rose's wedding was held the following spring, a joyous affair that brought friends from miles around to celebrate. The young couple would be staying in the territory, taking over the bride's family ranch, which meant Juliana would still see her daughter regularly. It was bittersweet, letting go, but also deeply satisfying to see Rose so happy and well prepared for her own life. Tommy showed no signs of settling down, too in love with the mountains and the freedom of their life to think about marriage yet. Jack was already talking about becoming a guide, about exploring even deeper into the wilderness than their valley. Both boys were strong like their father, both capable and kind. As Juliana watched her family that day, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. All those years ago, sitting in her aunt's parlor, she had been certain her life was over. She had been reduced to a diagnosis, a problem to be solved or hidden away. And then Xander had walked into that room with his weathered face and clear eyes, and offered her something no one else had: respect and opportunity. He had seen past her illness to the person underneath, had trusted her to be useful despite her limitations, had fallen in love with her, not despite her seizures, but simply as part of who she was, integrated into the whole person rather than defining her completely. That night, after the celebration had wound down and the guests had departed or settled into bedrolls around the property, Juliana and Xander slipped away to the porch. It was their ritual, their sacred space, and even after all these years, they treasured these quiet moments together. "Happy?" Xander asked, pulling her into his arms. "Completely," Juliana said honestly, "though I might have a few regrets." "Oh?" He sounded surprised. "I wish I could have given you more children. I wish my illness hadn't made pregnancy so difficult and risky each time." Xander was quiet for a moment, then he tilted her face up to his. "Juliana, you gave me 3 perfect, healthy, wonderful children and never once complained about how hard it was. You have nothing to regret. Our family is exactly the right size. I also wish I could help more with the heavy work, that I wasn't still having episodes that take me out of commission for hours or days." "Stop." His voice was firm but loving. "You run this household. You keep the books for the trading post. You teach the children and tend the garden and make this place beautiful. You do more in a day than most people do in a week. Your seizures are just something we work around, same as I work around my bad knee from that time the horse threw me, or the way my shoulder aches before rain. We all have limitations." She looked up at him. This man who had been her partner and lover and best friend for over 2 decades. "How did I get so lucky?" "I've been asking myself that same question since the day you agreed to come with me." He kissed her forehead tenderly. "You took a chance on a rough mountain man with more solitude than sense. You made me believe in the possibility of happiness again." "You saved my life," Juliana said simply. "In every way a person can be saved." They stood together in the darkness, holding each other close, while inside their home, their children slept and the fire burned low in the hearth. The mountains rose around them, eternal and protective, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Years continued to unfold, bringing changes both welcome and challenging. Tommy eventually did fall in love with the daughter of a Mexican trader who came through regularly. They were married in a ceremony that blended cultures and languages, and they took over more and more of the trading post operations as Xander and Juliana gradually stepped back. Rose and her husband had 3 children of their own and brought them to visit often. Jack became a renowned guide, known throughout the territory for his skill in the wilderness, but he always came home between expeditions. Xander's hair turned completely silver, but he remained strong and capable well into his 60s. Juliana's seizures actually decreased in frequency as she aged, much to everyone's surprise. They speculated that perhaps the head injury had finally healed completely, or perhaps her body had simply adjusted. Either way, by the time she was 50, she was going months between episodes instead of weeks. They became the respected elders of their small community, the couple who had carved out a life in the wilderness and raised good children and treated everyone fairly. People sought their advice, their hospitality, their friendship. The trading post was now one of the most reliable landmarks in that part of New Mexico territory, a place where travelers knew they would find honest dealing and a warm welcome. One evening, when Juliana was 60 and Xander 64, they sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. Their bodies were older now, marked by time and hard work, but their love was as strong as ever. Stronger, perhaps, forged and tested and proven over decades. "I've been thinking," Xander said, his hand finding hers in the darkness. about what the doctor said that day in Hillsborough, that you couldn't be left alone. Ancient history, Juliana murmured, leaning against his shoulder. Maybe, but it got me thinking about what happens when I'm gone. I'm older than you, and men don't tend to last as long. Don't talk like that, Juliana said sharply, sitting up. You're healthy and strong. I am, but I'm also realistic, and I need to know that you'll be taken care of when I'm not here anymore. The children will take care of me. Tommy and his wife practically run the place now anyway. I know, but I need you to know something. He turned to face her, his weathered face serious in the starlight. These past 40 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. You made me whole. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to get up every morning. And even though I won't always be here in body, I'll never really leave you. My love for you will continue long after I'm gone. Tears streamed down Juliana's face. You're not allowed to leave me. We had a deal, remember? You said you never planned on leaving me anyway. And I kept that promise. Xander said softly, wiping her tears with gentle fingers. For every day I've had. But someday, one of us will have to go first. And I need you to promise me that you'll keep living, keep finding joy, keep being the remarkable woman you are. I promise, she whispered, but only if you promise to stay as long as you possibly can. That's an easy promise to make. As it turned out, Xander kept his word in that too. He remained strong and vital well into his 70s, still helping around the trading post, still chopping wood and repairing fences and entertaining his grandchildren with stories of his younger days. And Juliana stayed by his side, her health stable, her seizures now rare enough to be novelties rather than defining features of her life. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by their family, 3 children and 8 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. It was a warm summer evening, and someone had set up tables in the yard laden with food. There was music and dancing and laughter, and at the center of it all sat Xander and Juliana, holding hands and watching the celebration with deep contentment. 50 years, Juliana marveled. It feels like yesterday and like forever all at once. Best 50 years of my life, Xander said firmly, and I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Even the hard parts, the times when my seizures were so frequent we could barely manage, the winters when the cabin felt too small for all of us, the years when money was tight and we weren't sure we'd make it. Especially the hard parts. Those are the times when we learned what we were made of, when we proved that our love was strong enough to weather anything. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it tenderly. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Juliana Jameson. Then, now, and always. Rose stood up and called for everyone's attention. I want to propose a toast, she said, raising her glass, to my parents who showed all of us what true love looks like, who built a life together in this beautiful, harsh wilderness and never once gave up on each other, who taught us that challenges are just opportunities in disguise and that the measure of a person isn't in their perfection, but in their persistence. To Ma and Pa, may we all be so lucky. To Ma and Pa, everyone chorused, and Juliana felt her heart so full she thought it might burst. Later, when the party had wound down and they were alone in the cabin that had been their home for so many decades, Xander pulled Juliana into his arms and kissed her with all the passion and tenderness of their youth. I love you, he said against her lips, today, tomorrow, and for all eternity. I love you too, she whispered back. Thank you for seeing me, for choosing me, for giving me a life beyond my wildest dreams. No, Xander said firmly. Thank you for taking a chance on a rough mountain man with more hope than sense, for trusting me with your heart and your life, for making every single day an adventure. They made love that night slowly and tenderly, 2 bodies that knew each other completely, 2 souls that had long since merged into one. And afterward, as they lay tangled together in the bed where they had spent so many nights over so many years, Juliana felt a peace so complete it was almost overwhelming. She had come to this place broken and afraid, convinced that her life was essentially over, and she had found instead that it was just beginning. She had found love and purpose and belonging. She had found a partner who saw her not as a burden, but as a blessing. She had found home. Xander lived to be 79, remaining active and sharp until nearly the end. He passed away peacefully in his sleep one cold winter night, with Juliana holding his hand and their family gathered around. His last words were, "I kept my promise. I never left you, not really." And he hadn't. Juliana felt his presence in every corner of the trading post, in every mountain vista, in the faces of their children and grandchildren. She lived another 5 years after his passing, healthy and content, surrounded by family and fulfilled by a life well lived. When her time finally came, she went peacefully, with a smile on her face and her hand outstretched as if reaching for someone only she could see. They buried her next to Xander on the ridge overlooking their valley, under the aspens that turned gold every autumn. The headstones were simple but spoke volumes. Xander Jameson, beloved husband, father, friend. He never planned on leaving. Juliana Rose Jameson, beloved wife, mother, friend. She proved them all wrong. And in the valley below, the trading post continued to thrive under the care of their descendants, a lasting testament to two people who had refused to let fear or limitation define their lives, who had chosen love over caution, adventure over safety, and partnership over solitude, who had built something beautiful and enduring in the wild heart of the New Mexico mountains. Their story became local legend, the tale of the mountain man who took in a woman everyone said was too much trouble, and the woman who proved that strength comes in many forms. Parents told it to their children as a lesson about looking past surface challenges to see true worth. Young couples invoked their names when making wedding vows, hoping for a love as enduring as theirs had been. Tommy and his wife ran the trading post for another 30 years before passing it to their own children. The little valley continued to be a place of welcome and honest dealing, a landmark of reliability in an ever-changing world. And always, visitors would look up at the ridge where two simple headstones stood watch and remember the couple who had proved that love and determination could overcome any obstacle. Because in the end, that was the truth of Xander and Juliana's story. Not that he had saved her, or that she had needed saving, but that they had saved each other. Two broken people who had found wholeness together. Two lonely souls who had discovered that companionship could make even the hardest life bearable, even beautiful. They said she couldn't be left alone. The mountain man had said perfect, because he never planned on leaving her anyway. And for 50 years, through joy and sorrow, sickness and health, abundance and scarcity, he had kept that promise. And she had kept her promise to him, building a life of purpose and meaning from what everyone else had dismissed as impossible. Their love had been tested by every challenge the frontier could throw at them, and it had emerged not just intact, but strengthened. It had been a love built on respect and trust and genuine partnership, a love that saw each other clearly and chose each other anyway, every single day. And that, in the end, was the greatest legacy they left behind. Not the trading post, or the family they raised, or the lives they touched, though all of those mattered, but the simple, profound truth that love, real love, was a choice you made over and over again, that it was found not in grand gestures but in daily commitment, in showing up, in staying, in seeing past surface difficulties to the person underneath, in saying perfect when everyone else said impossible, in never planning to leave and then keeping that promise with every breath and every heartbeat until the very end and beyond.